It's my pleasure to introduce our panelist for today's broadcast, Katie Davies, Senior Director of Advisory Services at Radius. Katie oversees Radius's advisory client engagements across 5 continents with expertise in a wide variety of cross-border issues, including HR, tax, intellectual property, and immigration consulting. Over to you, Katie.
Thanks, Ed, and good afternoon, everybody, or good morning. So today's session is really focused on the HR challenges of doing business internationally, whether that's for the first time or maybe in terms of regularizing an inherited situation where companies have already gone international and may not have a good handle on their current sort of compliance status. So the agenda is in front of you. I'm not going to read it through. So we've gone to the first slide. And we start this session looking at company structure. And you might ask, in an HR environment, why does company structure matter? And the answer is, it's fundamental, because particularly where you're going into a new territory for the first time, if you don't already have an international entity or a company in that particular territory, then it's obviously going to impact the hiring timeline and the ability to make commitments to individuals in territory in terms of the timeline that it might take to set up that local entity. And then the other question is, what local entity? What is actually required to be set up, if anything, in a particular country? So I always start this session with these company considerations, because even though it's not directly the responsibility of the HR practitioners to understand corporate structure, the corporate tax impact, and the legal ramifications of setting up in territory, it's absolutely vital that a good understanding of the requirement is taken on board by the HR team, because it does impact their day-to-day jobs and their ability to commit to future hires. As well as the fact that over time, depending on the volume of hiring and recruitment going on in a particular country, what initially has been set up might need to be reevaluated or changed to reflect the new volume of heads in country. And we'll look at that as we go through the presentation. So having a legal entity in country matters not only from a time ability to hire, it also means that from a local perspective, if you're trying to attract and retain talent, it means that there is a commitment to the marketplace, and you've actually invested in that country by setting up a footprint. And that can be important, particularly if you're a fairly new company setting up for the first time overseas, and you're trying to attract talent, luring them away from existing positions and existing jobs, particularly with more established companies. So there is a softer side here, more than just purely this corporate tax and legal side, which says that should we be setting up some sort of local presence in order to demonstrate our commercial commitment to that local market. And then the further impact of the type of entity that you have is that it can actually impact your ability to source certain things. For example, if you have a payroll loan registration or representative office, which is kind of the minimal registration just to run a payroll in a particular country, then it can limit the number of benefit providers that you can select, because some of them will want to engage locally with a full-blown entity as opposed to a foreign company that's just registered for payroll. So it's important to understand that, because it can impact other things in the HR arena. The final point on this piece that I just want to flag is that when we're looking at international expansion or operating internationally, although it's an obvious point, it sometimes becomes very apparent that many of our client organizations don't have good internal communication. And the one thing I've learned for the many years that I've been doing this work is it's essential that all the stakeholders within an organization, whether that's legal, tax, finance, accounting, payroll, HR, are all on the same page with respect to the timeline, the obligations, the commitments, the effort to actually do business internationally. And that includes the frontline salespeople and the operations teams who are oftentimes driving that international expansion, so that everybody's on the same page with respect to what it takes to set up compliantly and do business to hire, attract and retain staff internationally. So what I regard as obvious but oftentimes gets overlooked, and that's why it's important that HR practitioners are asking these questions perhaps outside of their comfort zone to make sure that all the dots are being connected internally.